Welcome to CRH Key Points Podcast. My name's Mark Page. I'm from Certified Resale Home, and with me today is Ross Bridges from Remax Aboutowne in Oakville. Welcome, Ross.
Mark, thank you very much for having me here to talk today about the resale program.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the market. We're going to talk about a little bit about you. I thought we'd start just for our listeners, we'll do some introductions. Why don't we start with myself and then we'll hand it over to you because you're the guest. My background is I was a corporate lawyer for a number of years and then recently moved into a business role. Really the only reason I mention that is because it's really relevant to what we're going to talk about in the sense that I work for a company called FCT and we are heavily ingrained in the real estate life cycle here in Canada. And the product we're specifically going to talk about at some point during this podcast, Certified Resale Home, is one of those services products that we have brought to market along that real estate life cycle, really to improve the process, the customer experience, the risk, but also provide information, transparency, and support our customers. In this case, the customers being realtors like yourself. So why don't you give our listeners an overview of your background and who you are? And
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. So I have an extensive background, I guess, growing up in construction real estate, basically seeing my dad who he did well in the restoration game, also accumulating properties over his career. And basically from a young age, I worked on site with him at a company he had in Etobicoke, Summit Restoration. And that was my summer jobs, and then working with Old World Stone as a stone cutter. So I got to learn a little bit about the ins and outs of construction. My passion is more working with people, the consumer. I did contemplate going into investment sales and becoming a stockbroker, but realized that I wanted to be more in front of people. So a little over 8 years ago, I decided I wanted to work with Remax. A brand that I believed in, and a company that I knew through Oakville Remax Aboutowne, which is known throughout the GTA, Canada, as one of the strongest brokerages in Canada. And I'm very proud to be a member of over 200 agents there and having a wonderful broker owner in Claudio DiPaolo to take care of us. So my background is sales and marketing. That's a little bit of kind of where I started my career. I've sold stone. I even did, while I was working towards my real estate license, I did a stint with Oakville Nissan Infinity, selling cars and kind of diversifying my sales ability. And like we discussed earlier, a big part of sales is customer service. And I look to a program like the Certified Resale Home program and FCT as leaders in the industry, and it's a great relationship, obviously, that we can share with Remax for providing our clients, the consumer, the best care we possibly can provide them.
so hold that thought because we'll come back to that. But I just want to focus a little bit just on you because I'm intrigued. Before we sort of started, we had a bit of a chat, and so it's just a few things, probably more for the benefit of the listeners. So and you mentioned Remax. So as a realtor, how do you go about deciding which brokerage you're going to join? And the reason I ask that is that it's fair to say in the real estate industry, there's quite a bit of talk around the fact that the brokerage model itself is probably under threat. And if I just use myself as a consumer, the value I would see in it is that it's a brand that provides. It's solid. It provides some comfort because it's been around so long. But you as a realtor, I mean, you've got to hand over money to a brokerage on the basis that you're getting support. So help sort of our listeners and even myself understand what sort of process do you go through to choose which brokerage you're actually going to sign up with?
That's a great question. So when I first started, I went out and I interviewed with several different brokerages, and having an employee mindset at the time, you're going in there thinking that I'm looking to get a job, right?
Right.
As I learned going to these brokers, after about my second interview, I realized it was me that was interviewing them, and that you're basically going out there and looking for, we can talk about branding, we can talk about who's going to be the best location for me to work.
Yeah.
But it does come down to, I'm a big believer that it's the people that makes the place and not the place that makes the place. So when I put myself in the hands at the time of Augie Carnevale and Adrian Lake, who were immense to me as coaches, and we all have coaches in life, the people that take you for guidance. Charlotte Forget, she was someone else who was there for me as she came on as a manager with Remax Aboutowne. And now I look to Claudia DePaulo, Doug Bedrosian, and the team that they've surrounded themselves with at Remax Aboutowne. So the culture has, if anything, it's gotten better. What Claudia DePaulo has done to bring to our marketplace within the GTA is to create a class and a standard that's second to no one. So to ensure that we are always looking out with best education first, we have meetings more than once a month just to provide ourselves with making sure that we're engaged, as well as courses. There's a lot of courses that go on. So when I look to how am I going to best represent my client, my friend, my family, whoever that person I'm representing at the time, I need to make sure that I'm looking for who's going to give me the best representation and protection. You know, CYA, I need to make sure that I have the best legal background, I have the best accountants working for me, and home inspectors. I pride myself on working with home inspectors, whether it's with the Certified Resale Home program or engineers that I've worked with other firms as well too.
Very good. So the second point, again, we talked about this in terms of where you started. So you started 2009, circa 2009.
Yeah.
Very different market 2009 to what we've experienced up until, frankly, the last 8 weeks. So let's sort of talk about that period. And you probably are sort of unusual in the sense that you started at a time where you saw the downturn, although obviously there's a lot of realtors that have been in the game long term, but at least you've had the benefit of seeing what you saw back then, the market as it was 8 weeks ago, and now what we'll call sort of a rebalance. And so perhaps just explain how you got going. You mentioned obviously the foundational support of the brokerage and the people that were mentors for you, but sort of how did you get going then, and what sort of lessons has that given you, particularly now that we see the market having shifted again in the last 8 weeks?
Thank you, Mark. No, great question. So looking at it first and foremost, I would say that I'm still young in the game in terms of I'm in the growth period of my business. There are agents in Oakville and in my office that have been in the game for 35, 40 years, and they've had to battle. They're on maybe their third or fourth recession. And what we just went through as of April 21st was not a recession. It was an announcement made by a government to attempt to make a correction in the marketplace, and that's something that we'll come back and talk on as well too. Back in the fall of 2008, I think it was about end of August, beginning of September, the markets did hit a recession. And working in Oakville, Burlington, Toronto, I did see basically the market stopped, and we had houses that were on the market for 6 months, some over a year. Some homes in certain circumstances, like luxury homes, could take upwards of 2 years to sell. And so those were difficult conditions to start in, and it taught me work ethic and basically making sure that you were doing the details. And you have to be explorative in any business to make sure you're getting the right clients and the people that you want to work with. So for me, I pride myself on starting during that period and being able to survive. But I also look to the agents before me, realtors before me, that have gone through many peaks and valleys. So I feel for me, it was just it was a good place to start.
Yeah.
Builds you tough from the beginning. Get your rhino skin.
Yeah. So let's talk about current conditions,
Sure.
and let's talk about, particularly as you mentioned, it seems that this is a government-induced correction, if I can use that as the correct sort of term. One that I think has resulted in potentially, obviously, buyers and sellers just taking a breather, potentially, just to see maybe what will happen in sort of a longer term period. So let's talk about the current conditions in the sense of where we're at. Particularly, let's talk about your. We can talk about generally, or we can talk about your area, which is sort of Oakville, Burlington, and what you're experiencing in terms of buyers and sellers in that market today.
So we've gone from arguably the strongest seller market in the history of real estate in Ontario to a balanced market basically over the course of the last 6-8 weeks. We're seeing houses stay on the market now upwards of a few months, depending on how they're positioned on the market, strictly talking price point. We're not seeing offer dates anymore. We're seeing offers that are either accepted that day or within a 48-hour period. So more importantly than ever, the correction long term, I think, was for the greater good. It was to protect the consumers long term, to allow homes to be on the market a little bit more, to be positioned properly, to allow for due diligence from both sides, both the seller and the buyer. And that's something that we can stress more with the certified resale home program later on. But it ensures that the consumers can go to bed at night and decide that next day, do I want to buy that home? And they can look at all angles, and it gives us more time as the agents, as the sales representatives, to ensure that we're doing what's in their best interest. And, making a decision in the blink of an eye is never going to be easy for anyone. I have an expression I use with my clients, and it's listen to your head, your heart, and your gut, but listen to your gut first. Well, making a gut decision in a matter of seconds, we don't know if those are butterflies or if that's for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
So strictly, I think that long term, it's for the best. Where I find that it's really affected consumers is how about those people that have saved their nest egg and they've already purchased a home, whether it's somewhere else down south or somewhere else in Canada, and they've gone to cash out, and you think about what they went through in the early 80s when they were paying 18 to 21% interest, and now they're going on their retirement, and this is their nest egg, and they're basically seeing 10% of their potential of their major asset basically disappear overnight because of a government announcement.
Yeah. So, how did you feel yourself, and as a realtor? Because in the situation in the market we had 8 weeks ago, and the 12 months before that, with respect to the fact that if you were a buyer coming into a home that's listed, you're unlikely to succeed on a few things, starting with conditions, whether it's home inspection, financing, and then not even sure whether you're actually your bid is going to be successful or not. I mean, that just for obviously realtors, and there's the perception from a consumer standpoint that with that crazy bidding that we saw, realtors are making hay with commissions and all that sort of stuff. But how did you feel in the sense of with buyers, particularly on the buy side? Because for the seller, it's fantastic. I mean, as you said, nest egg, retirement, all that stuff. But from a buyer's perspective, and I think you touched on it, not great for the market, but and also ultimately, my own view is not good for you as realtors either. You want to sort of just touch on because you went through it.
Absolutely. I felt sorry for buyers, like as someone who wants what's right for the consumer, when they're going up against anywhere from 8 to 20 offers on a single property, and knowing that basically there can only be one winner, and then you're all going back to the drawing board, and knowing that we did not have a lot of homes on the market at the time. The market conditions were tough, and it was literally, I refer to it as almost like a feeding frenzy. Like you can see like fish, how we had like a major feeding frenzy go on, and then look at the markets now. It's basically like, well, they've had enough to eat, and everyone's kind of gone, and they're waiting for the dust to settle. But I'm actually doing a sales seminar with our team on July 20th with Team Bridges and Remax Aboutowne. We're going to do that at the head office. And it's going to be preparing both sellers and buyers for how to prepare, even in these market conditions, to buy. But in terms of, we look at things like pre-approval and having a certified bank draft in hand. Yeah. Those were not options in order to win a house, having to waive your financing. So we had to make sure, and we had this not just by word, and making sure that the mortgage specialists that you're working with are not trying to submit offers before they've even firmed up, right? Like if they were even, most of the things, like there was very, very few conditional deals that I did in the last year or two, but just making sure that you're protected and that you know exactly, it's a game, right? So if you have a coach, someone on the sidelines helping you and giving you insight, not necessarily information, but it's more insight into how things are going to be portrayed. With the Certified Resale Home program, one thing that I really, really enjoyed was I could give both the seller and the buyer peace of mind. Peace of mind that you can't just get like saying like, oh, well, there was a circumstance I had once where there was a house that was on the market and my buyer wanted to put an offer in. They had not done a pre-inspection on the property. They had not done a pre-home inspection on the property. And so I wanted to do my due diligence to protect my client, and I requested doing a home inspection, and they refused us the right to have a home inspection. Now, from where I'm standing, how is that even legally acceptable to ensure that what I need to do is to protect my consumer? How do I know what's going on with the foundation? How do I know what's going on with that house? Yeah. So it just gave me, knowing that I can use a product like this to protect both the buyer and the seller gives me peace of mind, and I know I can sleep at night.
So let's sort of touch on how do you as a realtor decide what products or services you're going to be? Because you must get bombarded, I'm going to say without knowing, on a weekly basis from someone looking to upsell you something, whether it's advertising, search engine optimization, staging companies. It could be anything. Removal companies. How do you sort of sort between the wheat and the chaff in the sense of figuring out what you want to bring to the table in terms of your style and what you're all about as a realtor?
Raymond Pace, he's a brilliant realtor in Century 21, once described to me that just like any great artist, you're just finding out how to use your paintbrush to become an artist at your craft. So what I will say to that is I've tried many different techniques, throw stuff against the wall, see what sticks. Yeah. And when I find something I like, I tell everybody about it and make sure that I know this is what's in the best interest of our industry, of my brokerage, and of fellow realtor, and more importantly, the clients and consumers, my friends and family that are out there, to make sure that we're looking out for their best interest. Yeah. All of those products that you discussed, I use them and I've tried them all. Just like any business, you have to be wise with what's going to be in the best interest of not only yourself but also of your clients, right? To make sure that we're protected, and also this is business. Yeah. We are in transactional business. We need to make sure that we are doing what's right and that things close. These market conditions have been crazy as they've changed. We could just talk for an hour about how it's been difficult for mortgage specialists and lawyers closing deals when they don't have homes that are protected.
Yeah. I mean, let's sort of touch on our listeners. Let's just talk about Certified Resale Home very quickly, because what I want to do is I want to move on to talking and get your views on the future of real estate and the future of realtors, going forward, particularly as we see generational change, not just, society, but also in terms of the realtors that are currently out there. I think I read recently that the average age of your Ontario realtor is 54. And I know from personal experience, having sold a property about 2 months ago, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and the offers were coming back and forth. And I said to my realtor, I said, why couldn't we use an electronic transaction management platform for this? And you could send it to me electronically. I can be in my PJs at home, and you're not coming in and out of the house while my kids are sleeping, and because there's going to be a bit of noise. So it's more convenient for me. And his answer to me was, I've only got another 5 years left, and then I'm out of it. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, so to speak. But from my perspective, that probably would put me off, notwithstanding great realtor, great guy. That would probably, next time, the convenience factor for me would be something that I'd probably be saying, look, love what you do, great, but I'm probably going to go with someone who's using something that's more convenient for me. So maybe we'll just quickly touch on Certified Resale Home, and then we'll talk about some of those facets that I sort of touched on. So Certified Resale Home is a pre-listing home inspection combined with a warranty. And as you said, Ross, it's a warranty that starts with the seller and then transfers to the buyer on closing. The unique thing about this service is that we are really shifting the paradigm. So the way of the world traditionally, until we had this crazy market, was that you do a buy-side inspection. And you probably experienced, even in a more balanced market, the buy-side inspection does create anxiety and stress. You as a realtor are worried about whether there are going to be any issues that are revealed, the seller's wanting to sell that home without any issues, getting top dollar, and the buyer's already emotionally attached to that home, and they certainly don't want a home inspection issue to derail it. But we know that those issues do arise. But it's a stressful experience, and it perpetuates that buyer beware environment. And real estate, and particularly the real estate transaction itself, is probably one of the most archaic transactions that we do in our lives. When you compare it to a lot of the other things we do, whether it's banking, wealth management, buying books, buying flowers online, it's still very much steeped in how it was done 40 years ago. And that includes, the process that you go through generally, and even the legal transaction, which I'm more familiar with. So what we're looking to do is really shift that paradigm and bring that information transparency to bear. And you touched on that trust, that confidence. So let's sort of, why don't we talk about sort of the future of real estate? Because I have my own views around what that might look like, being the father of a 12 and a 10-year-old who can find things on the internet faster than I can, and at the click of a button. So why don't we sort of talk about that, but in the context of Certified Resale Home is really looking to tap into that. When I look at the millennial generation, they're used to information transparency, and they're used to it, and what it builds for them is trust, because having access to that gives them comfort. And so what we're looking to do with this service, which you've adopted, and we thank you for your support of it, and we hope that it's delivering the value that you want out of it, and is bringing that value to your clients and to the transaction, is that's aligned with a notion of bringing information transparency to the parties, to the transaction, as well as optimizing process and making the customer experience. Because I think when you look at a lot of other facets of what we do, it's all about the customer experience. And so this is one aspect of that. But why don't I get your thoughts on where you think, there's a lot there that I spoke about, but maybe if I could summarize, looking at the generations coming through, look at you mentioned your peers and you mentioned those mentors. And, with no disrespect to them, you're of a younger generation, so you have a bit of a different perspective in terms of seeing the younger buyers that are coming through, and the younger sellers ultimately in the next little while, in terms of where you see real estate and in particular the role of a realtor in that process.
So we have pretty much moved more from information to insight, in terms of the consumer just has potential clients have so much wealth of information at at their fingertips, right? And you touched on a couple things that I'm a big believer in. One is adaptability, and also transparency and building trust in the relationships that we have. One thing that's amazing about real estate is the human relationship. And you touched upon having somebody at your house at 11 o'clock at night. Well, I don't think that's the future of the human relationship in real estate, but I do think that there is something to having a hands-on approach to being able to physically go to the properties, to meet, to engage, and to obviously have that information exchange where you have a chance to really touch on the psychology of your client and to figure out what the heck do they want, what's in their best interest, and how am I going to help them, and how are we going to get from here to here. With each client I pick up, it's a contract. Some contracts might take a week, others might take years. I've had some clients that I haven't sold a home to, and I've started with them basically 4 or 5 years ago, just because they weren't ready. And with the market conditions, it's a lot easier to buy a home now than it was a few years ago. I could touch a lot on the future of real estate for the consumer, for young consumers, and my advice would be to start early, to look into maybe you're buying a property with your sibling, or your parents are assisting you with buying a condo, and that becomes a rental property. And I would love to inspire the future children that are listening that are 15, 16 years old going, how the heck am I ever going to own a home, right? And there should be bursaries and ways of assisting through government assistance. I think a lot of this tax money should be going back towards bursaries and towards certain abilities to help scholarships and ways to ensure that the future generation are going to be able to buy houses. And how do we make that acceptable? How do we make that affordable? And it starts with a plan and being able to execute that plan. Adaptability. I think looking at the future of real estate and saying, how is it going to engage? I mean, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have been prepared to do videos or to be seen on social media, or maybe even doing my first podcast here with you, Mark.
Yeah.
So it's an honor to basically expand and to spread your wings and to figure out how am I best going to help my client to get the message out there and to ensure that we're giving the best information and insight to the future of the consumers and for future generations.
Yeah, I think you're spot on in the sense that I couldn't envisage, and I'm obviously an older generation than millennial, I couldn't envisage not physically seeing a home. And I think there is a place for realtors to guide people through the process and take out, to some degree, a lot of that emotion. Because as you touched on, it is a transaction, but it's an emotional transaction. So I think from a realtor's perspective, the real value that you bring is bringing your expertise to taking out that emotion and guiding someone through what can be a very stressful and emotive process. But I just want to focus sort of briefly on where you see realtors changing, in the sense of, realtors have been used to 5% commissions, 6% commissions here in North America, which, our listeners will gather I have a bit of a different accent. I come from way down south, and we, down there, it's very much, auctions are pretty much standard. So there's lots of information transparency. And your commission levels are not 5 or 6%. They're 1% if 1%. So North America is a bit of an anomaly. And so do you see, with the fact that from a generational standpoint and money being tight for younger generation, 5 or 6% continuing without there being a shift in the sense of what realtors are bringing to the table and doing in the transaction? And do you also see that process of what realtors are doing changing? So there's those two. So there's a generational of coming through, the realtor themselves. And then the third thing I want to ask you to comment on is around, and I mentioned this at the outset, the brokerage model. because I hear from a lot of realtors, and I think you've touched on why you love the brokerage and the support you're getting, and that's fantastic. But I hear from a lot of other realtors who question the value they're getting from the brokerage, and so I'd like you to touch on that as well.
I'm going to start by saying I had the pleasure of going down to Australia with my mom this last winter. It was a bucket list trip, so I just wanted to throw that out there while we're talking.
Where did you go there, Ross?
Well, we started in Brisbane, and we did the Gold Coast and the
lovely.
Sunshine Coast,
Yep.
and went up to Cairns, and we had the pleasure of doing the Great Barrier Reef. We spent a few days in Sydney, and then we spent a little over a week in Melbourne, and we went
my
to the
hometown.
tennis. Melbourne?
Yep, Melbourne's my hometown.
I had the
Yep.
pleasure of seeing, I'm a big tennis fan, so I had the pleasure of seeing Federer and Nadal in the finals. So it was a trip that we had planned since I was about 16, 17. Now on to your question, value proposition, and in terms of looking at each client is their own circumstance, right? So I talk a lot in terms of the psyche and the understanding of providing the best customer care to each and every individual that I put myself in front of. So some transactions go easier than others. And is that because of my expertise, because of my skill set, because of what I'm providing for the consumer? Or is that just because of market conditions, right? So in each and every circumstance, there are definitely hurdles to overcome and things that are going to allow you to differentiate yourself from the pack. With regards to looking at commissions, I think it should be looked at on an individual basis. And I'll probably leave it at that. If people are going to be buying and selling, or if they're just going to be buying or selling, and ensuring that obviously when it comes down to it, you're providing them with all the tools that you have in your toolbox to give them the best outcome. This is a lot of money that we're talking about, right? So for their financial freedom, to ensure that you're helping them I pride myself on being a real estate advisor, a financial real estate advisor. And if you look at that, this is a bigger asset than a lot of people have with their stock portfolio. And we put a lot more time and effort into the transaction with these people. It's very hands-on when it's coming down to it. So to look at the market conditions and to take everything into effect, things will change for sure. And business models, everybody has, in this day and age, we have the option of what everyone's business model looks like. I could talk about the banks and their business models. We could maybe talk about the government. It's a pretty big business. But where I'm going with this is in terms of realtors in the future. Maybe a lot more personalized brokerages is a way of the future, but I stand behind a brand like RE/MAX, and I know that there are millions of agents worldwide that are helping me bringing new clients into the world and ensuring that, like with the RE/MAX collection, luxury brand, we're doing what we can to provide the best awareness, and we team with companies like First Canadian Title and the Certified Resale Home program to ensure that we're providing the best experience for our clients, and we pride ourselves on our service. Let our service be your success is one of our team slogans that we stand behind, and that ensures that we are obviously looking out for the future. Whether it's like I discussed, whether it's that baby boomer that's ready to retire and they're sitting on their nest egg, or it's the millennial or Generation Z that's entering into buying their first home, which is a huge step, right? And how are they going to get into a condo, and then how are they going to get into a townhouse and into a house? And it's going to be more steps in order to get there, and ensuring that they do have the best credit rating, that they have done their homework to protect themselves with mortgage specialists, and they're looking out for their future at a young age.
Yeah. So let me just touch on maybe from a consumer's perspective, and this is from my perspective as well. And you talked about the differentiation of for realtors in the marketplace. If I'm a consumer, and I went through this in the sense of selling homes, and I interviewed several realtors, or I am going to interview several realtors to sell a home. what I find, and this is no disrespect to you, but what I find is realtors, a lot of it's apples to apples. So in a listing presentation, I'll get someone come in and say, well, I'm going to do drone photography. I'm going to do measurements of the home. I'm going to provide you with a consultation for home staging. And then my view is, well, okay, well, that's what the next person said. And then I might get someone else who will say, well, I'm going to provide you with superior customer service or experience. And for me, that's a given. That should be just, that's not even a differentiator for me, to be frank. So we've sort of touched on this as we've gone through this, but let's sort of maybe end on this, because I think with Certified Resale Home, this is one service or product that has allowed you to truly differentiate your services. But how do you, at a high level, when you're going into a listing presentation, differentiate yourself? Because it's very easy when everything looks the same, and if everything does in fact look the same, if I'm a consumer, you're immediately just going to go to price or commission. And that, to me, from a realtor's perspective and an overall industry perspective, is just going to be a race to the bottom. That's going to result in commoditization. So how do you go into a listing presentation and differentiate yourself from the next person or the person before you?
So to touch on what I said a little bit earlier about adaptability and tools in the toolbox, it's basically ensuring that you're ahead of the game, that you're taking advantage of all the tools that social media has. I've done a lot more with video just to try and get myself out there for Google, for recognition, through website, Facebook, just to try and differentiate myself in terms of social media platforms, because that is a huge part of the future of real estate. But also in products that people can trust and respect, like the Certified Resale Home program with First Canadian Title. Arguably some of the most reputable companies that you could say out there for title insurance and for protecting yourself for the future of buying or selling a home. So like I said, being an artist in the game of real estate, I have looked at many different products and services out there, and at this point in my career, I can say I am an expert. I do look out for the best interest of whether it's that first-time buyer or someone that's selling their luxury home, and just ensuring that they're getting the best, and you said customer care, likability, ensuring the person in front of them is someone they're going to enjoy working with, and that at the end of the day, they're going to get the experience that they deserve as we go through it. This is a very experience transaction related business, and we talk about the human psyche, and we talk about protecting them, and obviously ensuring that we're always looking out for their best interest. Well, I mean, those things might be given, but if you take all of those things and you put them into one bucket and say, this is what I'm bringing to the table, this is what I represent, then I think that it's going to stand out above the crowd.
Well, I think we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us today, Ross. I also hope you get back to Melbourne. Maybe take in an Australian rules football game when you're there next.
Maybe I could get
a cricket game.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But appreciate you spending some time with us. I hope our listeners have found this informative, and all the best. Thanks very much.
Mark, thank you very much for having me here today.
Yep. Cheers.